The morning mist hung low over the Gloucestershire countryside as Princess Anne guided her horse through the familiar trails of Gatcombe Park. The rhythmic sound of hooves against damp earth had always been her meditation, her escape from the relentless scrutiny that came with royal duties. But, today, even this sanctuary couldn't silence the worry that had been gnawing at her heart for weeks. Catherine had been different lately, and had noticed it during the last family gathering at Windsor Castle. The way her daughter-in-law's smile seemed to require more effort, how she held herself with a tension that spoke of hidden battles. Anne had seen that look before, in her own mirror during the darkest moments of her life, and it sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the October morning. As she dismounted near the stable, Anne's phone buzzed with a message from William. 3 simple words that made her world tilt: "And we need you." She stared at the screen, her weathered hands trembling slightly. In all the years she had known her nephew, he had never asked for help so directly, so desperately. The drive to Kensington Palace felt eternal. Anne's mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. She had always prided herself on being the practical one, the royal who got things done without fuss or drama. But, today, practicality felt useless against the growing dread in her chest. Kensington Palace seemed unusually quiet as Anne walked through the familiar corridors. The staff moved with hushed efficiency, their faces carefully neutral but their eyes betraying the same worry that Anne felt. She found William in his study, staring out the window at the gardens where his children often played. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and, when he turned to face her, she saw a vulnerability in his eyes that reminded her painfully of the boy he had been after Diana's death. "She wants to tell you herself," William said without preamble. His voice was steady, but Anne could hear the effort it took to maintain that composure. "The doctors confirmed it yesterday. It's cancer, Anne. They caught it early, they say, but..." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Cancer. Anne had faced many challenges in her 73 years, had weathered scandals and heartbreaks and the relentless pressure of public life. But this felt different, more personal somehow. Catherine wasn't just the future queen, she was the daughter Anne had never had, the one who had brought such light and stability to William's life. "Where is she?" Anne asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "In the garden with the children." She wanted them to have one more normal afternoon before. William's voice broke slightly. "Before everything changes." And found Catherine sitting on a bench near the rose garden, watching George, Charlotte, and Louis play on the swing set that had been installed the previous summer. The autumn sun caught the auburn highlights in Catherine's hair, and, for a moment, she looked exactly as she had on her wedding day, radiant and full of hope. But, as Anne approached, she could see the careful way Catherine held herself, the subtle signs of someone trying to appear stronger than she felt. "I wondered when you'd arrive," Catherine said softly, not turning around. "William texted you, didn't he?" "He's worried sick," Anne replied, settling beside her on the bench. "We all are." For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play. Charlotte was pushing Louis on the swing while George attempted to build something elaborate with fallen leaves. Their laughter carried on the autumn breeze, pure and uncomplicated in the way that only children's joy could be. "I keep thinking about your mother," Catherine said suddenly. "About how strong she was during her illness. I know it was different circumstances, but did she ever feel like she was failing everyone just by being sick?" The question hit Anne like a physical blow. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had faced her final illness with the same stoic dignity she had brought to everything else in her life. But, Anne remembered the private moments, the times when the mask slipped and revealed the frightened woman beneath the crown. "Every day," Anne answered honestly. She used to say that the hardest part wasn't the physical pain, but feeling like she was letting people down by not being invincible. "But, you know what I told her? The same thing I'm telling you now. Strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, over and over again, especially when everyone is watching." Catherine finally turned to look at her, and saw tears threatening to spill from eyes that had captivated the world for over a decade. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Anne. The treatment, the media attention, keeping the children's lives as normal as possible while fighting for my own life. What if I'm not enough?" "Oh, my dear girl," and said, reaching for Catherine's hand. "You've been preparing for this your entire adult life, even if you didn't know it. Every state dinner you've attended while exhausted, every public appearance you've made when you wanted nothing more than to hide, every smile you've maintained when the press was particularly cruel, all of that was training for this moment." The sound of the children's laughter grew louder as they invented some new game involving jumping over shadows. Catherine watched them with an expression of fierce protectiveness mixed with profound sadness. "They don't know yet," Catherine whispered. "We're waiting until after the school term ends. I want to give them a few more weeks of childhood before their mother becomes a patient instead of just mom." And squeezed Catherine's hand tighter. "You will always be their mom first. Cancer doesn't change that. If anything, watching you fight will teach them more about courage and resilience than any lesson they could learn in school. The doctors say the prognosis is good," Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. "Preventative chemotherapy, they call it. But the word chemotherapy is so frightening. I keep thinking about losing my hair, about being too weak to play with the children, about William having to watch me suffer the way he watched his mother suffer." "This is different," Anne said firmly. "You caught it early. You have the best medical care in the world. And, most importantly, you're not facing this alone. The family will rally around you in ways that perhaps we failed to do for Diana. We've learned from our mistakes." A cool breeze rustled the leaves around them, and Catherine pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The gesture reminded Anne of how young Catherine still was, despite all the responsibilities and public scrutiny she had shouldered over the years. "I've been thinking about what to tell the public," Catherine said. "The palace communications team wants to control the narrative, release a carefully worded statement that gives just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing too much. But I keep wondering if that's the right approach." "What do you want to do?" Anne asked. "I want to be honest," Catherine replied without hesitation. "I want to acknowledge that I'm scared, that this is hard, that being a member of the royal family doesn't make me immune to the same fears and struggles that every cancer patient faces. Maybe my honesty can help someone else feel less alone in their own fight." And felt a surge of pride at Catherine's words. This was exactly the kind of authentic leadership that the modern monarchy needed, not the distant perfection of previous generations, but a human approach that allowed people to connect with their future queen as a person, not just a symbol. "The old guard won't like it," Anne warned. "They'll say it's too personal, too revealing. They'll worry about how it affects the institution. Then, they'll have to adjust," Catherine said with a flash of the steel that had attracted William to her in the first place. "Because I refuse to pretend this isn't happening, and I refuse to face it wearing a mask. My children deserve a mother who shows them that vulnerability and strength can coexist. The country deserves a future queen who doesn't pretend to be superhuman." As if summoned by their conversation, William appeared on the garden path, his face carefully composed but his relief visible when he saw the two women talking. He approached slowly, giving them space to finish their conversation. "We should tell the children together," Catherine said, standing and smoothing her dress. "Tonight, after dinner. They deserve to hear it from us, not overhear it from worried adults or see it on someone's phone at school." And rose as well, her body protesting slightly after sitting on the cold bench. "Do you want me to stay? For support? Would you?" The hope in Catherine's voice was unmistakable. "I know it's asking a lot, but having you here would mean everything. You've been through so much with this family. You understand the weight of public duty combined with private pain. I'll stay as long as you need me," Anne replied without hesitation. "We'll face this together, all of us. And, when you're ready to share your story with the world, we'll make sure your voice is heard clearly, without distortion or manipulation." The three adults walked slowly back toward the palace, the children's voices echoing behind them as they continued their play, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. But, in the growing dusk of that October evening, there was also hope born of honesty, strengthened by family bonds, and fortified by the quiet determination of a woman who refused to let cancer define her or diminish her commitment to the people she served. That night, as Anne watched Catherine and William gently explain the situation to their children, she saw something remarkable. The same grace under pressure that had defined the royal family for generations, but tempered with a new kind of authenticity. Catherine's tears were real, her fear was acknowledged, and her love for her family was the foundation upon which her courage was built. The fight was just beginning, but Anne knew with certainty that Catherine would emerge from this battle not diminished, but transformed, and, in her transformation, she would transform the monarchy itself, making it more human, more relatable, and ultimately more powerful because of its honesty about both strength and vulnerability. The ivory writing paper felt heavier than usual in Catherine's hands as she sat at the antique desk in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace. 3 weeks had passed since that conversation in the garden with Princess Anne, and the time had come to share her truth with the world. The carefully crafted statement lay before her, written and rewritten dozens of times, each word weighed for its impact on her children, her family, and the millions of people who would read it. Outside her window, the November rain painted intricate patterns on the glass, matching the complexity of emotions swirling within her. The chemotherapy had begun the previous week, and, while the side effects were still minimal, the psychological impact was profound. Every morning when she woke up, there was a moment of disorientation before reality crashed back. She had cancer, and her life as she knew it had fundamentally changed. Anne knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tea service that she set down with practiced efficiency. This had become their ritual over the past weeks, afternoon tea where they could speak freely, away from the constant presence of protection officers, staff, and well-meaning family members. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Anne asked, settling into the chair opposite Catherine. Tomorrow was the day the statement would be released, followed by Catherine's first public appearance since her diagnosis was confirmed. Terrified, Catherine admitted, her honesty coming more easily now after weeks of practice. "Not about telling people I have cancer, that almost feels like a relief. But about everything that comes after. The scrutiny, the speculation, the way every photograph will be analyzed for signs of illness or recovery." And poured the tea with steady hands, the ritual providing a moment of normalcy in an increasingly surreal situation. "I remember when Mark's affair became public knowledge," she said, referring to her first husband's well-documented infidelity. "The palace advisors wanted me to say nothing, to maintain dignity through silence. But sometimes silence feels like complicity in your own diminishment. Is that what you think I'm doing by speaking out?" Catherine asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Quite the opposite," and replied firmly. "I think you're taking control of your narrative in a way that's both brave and necessary. The royal family has a long history of suffering and silence, of pretending that duty somehow makes us immune to human frailty. But you're changing that paradigm." Catherine picked up the statement again, reading her own words for what felt like the 100th time. The language was careful but honest, acknowledging her diagnosis without revealing details that might compromise her family's privacy. Most importantly, it spoke about her commitment to continue her royal duties while undergoing treatment, setting expectations for the months ahead. "William thinks I'm being too open," Catherine confessed. "Not about the cancer itself, but about my feelings regarding it. He worries that showing vulnerability will somehow diminish people's confidence in the institution." "And what do you think?" Anne asked. "I think the institution is stronger when people can see our humanity," Catherine replied without hesitation. "When I was growing up, the royal family seemed untouchable, almost mythical. But that distance also made them seem irrelevant to many people's daily struggles. If my honesty about this journey helps even one person feel less alone in their own battle, then any damage to the monarchy's mystique is worth it." The conviction in Catherine's voice reminded Anne of herself at that age, determined to forge her own path despite the weight of tradition and expectation. It was a quality that had served Anne well throughout her decades of public service, even when it sometimes put her at odds with palace protocol. "The children seem to be adjusting well," Anne observed, changing the subject slightly. "Better than I expected," Catherine agreed, her face softening as she thought of George, Charlotte, and Louis. "Children are remarkably resilient when adults are honest with them. We've explained that Mummy has an illness that requires special medicine, and that sometimes the medicine might make her tired or feel unwell, but that the doctors are very hopeful about helping her get better." "And their reactions?" George asked very practical questions about the treatment schedule and whether I'd still be able to attend his school events. Charlotte wanted to know if she could help take care of me, and Louis. Catherine's smile grew wider. Louis asked if having cancer means I get to wear princess pajamas all day. And chuckled at this, remembering the delightful simplicity with which children often viewed complex adult problems. From the mouths of babes. Perhaps there's something to be said for princess pajamas as medical attire. Actually, that's not far from the truth, Catherine laughed. The chemotherapy unit has these incredibly comfortable robes that make you feel pampered rather than like a patient. It's those small touches of dignity that make such a difference. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock, and William entered, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. The initial shock and fear had given way to a kind of determined purposefulness as he threw himself into supporting Catherine while maintaining his own royal obligations. The final press briefing is scheduled for this evening, he reported, settling into a chair near the window. The communications team has prepared talking points for family members, and all the major news outlets have been briefed on the guidelines for coverage. Guidelines? And raised an eyebrow. Nothing censorious, William assured her quickly. Just requests for responsible reporting, no speculation about prognosis, no harassment of medical staff, that sort of thing. We learned from past experiences that a little proactive communication with the media can prevent more intrusive coverage later. Catherine nodded approvingly. The balance between transparency and privacy was delicate, but she was determined to maintain some control over how her story was told. The statement would provide the basic facts, but the human elements, the fear, the hope, the daily realities of treatment, those would be shared on her own terms, when and if she chose to do so. I've been thinking about the long-term implications, Catherine said thoughtfully. Not just for my health, but for how this changes my approach to royal duties. I want to use this experience to become a more effective advocate for cancer research and patient support. You're already planning your comeback before you've even announced your diagnosis, and observed with admiration. That's the spirit that will see you through this. It's not a comeback, Catherine corrected gently. It's a continuation. I refuse to see this as an interruption to my life or my service. It's simply a new chapter, with different challenges and, perhaps, different opportunities to make a meaningful impact. The rain had intensified outside, creating a cocoon-like atmosphere in the sitting room. For a moment, all three of them were quiet, lost in their own thoughts about the journey that lay ahead. The next morning would mark the beginning of a very public battle, one that would be fought not just in chemotherapy suites and doctors' offices, but in newspaper headlines and social media posts around the world. I keep thinking about all the women who will be watching, Catherine said suddenly. The mothers who are facing their own health scares, the wives who are supporting husbands through illness, the daughters who are caring for aging parents. I have a platform that most cancer patients don't have. How do I use that responsibly? By being authentically yourself, Anne replied. Not trying to be inspirational or perfect, just honest about the reality of what you're experiencing. People don't need a royal superhero, they need to see that someone they admire faces the same fears and uncertainties they do. William reached for Catherine's hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become automatic over their years of marriage. You don't have to carry the weight of everyone else's hopes and fears, he reminded her gently. Your first responsibility is to yourself and our family. But I can't separate those things, Catherine replied. My recovery isn't just personal, it's public. Every step of this journey will be scrutinized and interpreted. I might as well make sure it's interpreted accurately. As evening approached, the three of them moved to the palace's informal dining room, where they shared a quiet dinner while finalizing the last details of the next day's announcement. The normalcy of the meal, roast chicken, autumn vegetables, conversation that moved easily between family matters and royal business, was both comforting and surreal given the gravity of what lay ahead. After dinner, Catherine retreated to her bedroom to call her parents. The conversation with Carol and Michael Middleton was emotional but strengthening, their unwavering support providing another layer of foundation for the challenges ahead. They had been present for every major milestone in her adult life, and their presence, even by phone, reminded her that she was more than just a future queen facing a health crisis. She was a daughter, beloved and supported unconditionally. Later that night, as Catherine performed her evening skincare routine with products specially chosen for chemotherapy patients, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same one who had married William in Westminster Abbey, who had given birth to 3 children, who had represented the crown on countless occasions around the world. But there was something different in her eyes now, a depth of understanding that came only from confronting one's own mortality. Tomorrow, that reflection would belong to the public as much as to herself. Her diagnosis would become part of the national conversation, her treatment schedule would influence royal calendar planning, and her recovery would be measured not just in medical terms but in public appearances and perceived vitality. But tonight, in the quiet of her private space, Catherine allowed herself to simply be a woman facing an uncertain future with as much grace and courage as she could muster. The public face she would wear tomorrow was important, but it was built on the foundation of the private strength she was still discovering within herself. As she prepared for bed, Catherine found herself thinking about all the women who would read her statement in the morning. The newly diagnosed patients sitting in oncology waiting rooms, the survivors celebrating years in remission, the family members learning to navigate the complex emotions of loving someone with cancer. She hoped that her words would provide comfort rather than just curiosity, connection rather than just sensation. The last thing she did before turning off the light was to look at the family photograph on her bedside table, William and the children laughing together during their last holiday. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, that love would be her anchor and her motivation. Everything else was just details to be managed with as much dignity and honesty as possible. The private oncology suite at the London clinic felt more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility, with its soft lighting, comfortable furnishings, and panoramic views of Regent's Park. But no amount of elegant decoration could disguise the reality of the four-pole beside Catherine's chair or the steady drip of chemotherapy drugs flowing into her bloodstream. It was her 4th treatment session, and the novelty of the surroundings had long since worn off, replaced by the familiar rhythm of treatment days. Princess Anne sat in the adjacent chair, working steadily through a pile of correspondence while keeping Catherine company during the 3-hour infusion. This had become their routine, and would arrive with official paperwork and a thermos of proper tea, creating a pocket of normalcy within the medical setting. Today was different though. Catherine seemed more contemplative than usual, watching the bare December trees through the window with an intensity that suggested her mind was far from the treatment room. The public response has been extraordinary, Catherine said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence they had maintained for the past hour. The cards, the flowers, the messages from complete strangers sharing their own cancer stories. I never expected such an outpouring of support. Anne looked up from the letter she was reading, studying Catherine's profile as she continued to gaze out the window. The chemotherapy had taken its toll over the past 6 weeks. Catherine's famous hair was noticeably thinner, carefully styled to disguise the effects, and there was a pallor to her skin that no amount of makeup could completely hide. But there was also something else in her bearing, a kind of quiet strength that hadn't been there before her diagnosis. Are you surprised that people see you as human rather than just a symbol? Anne asked gently. Yes and no, Catherine replied thoughtfully. I always hoped that my work would connect with people on a personal level, but I suppose I underestimated how much my vulnerability would resonate. Yesterday I received a letter from a woman in Yorkshire who was diagnosed with breast cancer on the same day I was. She said that knowing we were going through treatment at the same time made her feel less alone. And how does that make you feel? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Honored, she said finally. But also burdened. I know that sounds ungrateful, but every day I wake up knowing that hundreds of people are watching my journey for signs of hope or despair. If I have a good day, I worry about raising false expectations. If I have a difficult day, I worry about discouraging someone else who might be struggling. And set down her correspondence entirely, recognizing that this conversation required her full attention. Do you remember what I told you about your approach to royal duties when you first joined the family? You said I should never try to be the person I thought people wanted me to be, because authenticity was more valuable than perfection, Catherine recalled. The same principle applies here. You can't manage other people's hopes and fears, Catherine. You can only be honest about your own experience and trust that honesty will serve its purpose. The oncology nurse, a cheerful woman named Sarah who had been caring for Catherine since her first treatment, entered to check her vitals and adjust the flow rate. She had become genuinely fond of her royal patient, appreciating Catherine's lack of pretension and her genuine interest in the experiences of other patients. "How are you feeling today, Your Royal Highness?" Sarah asked, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Catherine's arm. "Please, just Catherine," she corrected automatically. "And I'm feeling well, thank you. The nausea seems to be better controlled with the new medication regimen." "Excellent. Dr. Patterson will be round shortly to discuss your progress. The latest blood work looks very promising." After Sarah left, Anne and Catherine returned to their conversation, but the interruption had shifted the mood slightly. The mention of blood work and progress reports brought them back to the clinical reality of Catherine's situation, the careful monitoring and measurement that had become the backdrop of her daily life. "I've been thinking about returning to public duties," Catherine said. "Nothing too strenuous at first, but Dr. Patterson says there's no medical reason I can't attend some events between treatment cycles. The palace communications team will be relieved and observed. They've been fielding questions about your schedule for weeks." "It's not about the palace schedule," Catherine said firmly. "It's about my sanity. I need to feel useful, to remember who I am beyond this diagnosis. Sitting at home feeling sorry for myself isn't helping anyone, least of all me." And smiled at the determination in Catherine's voice. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a new cancer research facility opening in Cambridge next month. I'd like to attend the ceremony, maybe meet with some of the researchers and patients. It feels appropriate somehow, using my first public appearance to highlight the work being done to help people in situations similar to mine." "And William's thoughts on this?" "He's worried, naturally. He's been incredibly protective since the diagnosis, sometimes to the point where I feel more like an invalid than a cancer patient. But I think he's beginning to understand that overprotecting me isn't helping either of us." The afternoon wore on, marked by the steady rhythm of the infusion pump and the quiet activities that filled treatment days. Catherine read through briefing papers for upcoming royal engagements, reviewed correspondence from her patronages, and occasionally dozed in the comfortable chair. And worked beside her, occasionally sharing an amusing anecdote from a letter or discussing family matters in low voices. Dr. Patterson arrived during the final hour of treatment, carrying a folder thick with test results and charts. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen thousands of patients through similar journeys. Her approach with Catherine was the same as with all her patients, professional but warm, honest but hopeful. "Your response to treatment continues to be excellent," Dr. Patterson reported after reviewing Catherine's file. "The tumor markers are declining steadily, and the imaging shows significant reduction in the affected area. We're very pleased with your progress." Catherine felt the familiar surge of relief that accompanied good news, tempered by the awareness that each positive report was only a snapshot of a longer journey. "How many more treatments?" "2 more cycles of the current regimen, which should take us into early February. Then, we'll reassess and likely move to a different protocol for the maintenance phase. Overall, you're responding exactly as we hoped you would." After Dr. Patterson left, Catherine and sat quietly for the remaining minutes of the infusion. The good news had lifted Catherine's spirits, but it also brought into sharper focus the reality of the months still ahead. This wasn't a sprint to recovery but a marathon requiring sustained effort and emotional endurance. "I keep thinking about the children," Catherine said as the nurse began disconnecting her from the floor. "How this experience is shaping their understanding of illness and mortality. George asks very direct questions about whether I might die, and I struggle with how honest to be. What does your instinct tell you? To be truthful but age-appropriate. To acknowledge that cancer can be serious while emphasizing that my doctors are very optimistic about my recovery. But sometimes I see worry in their eyes that breaks my heart. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for," and said, helping Catherine gather her belongings as they prepared to leave. "And they're learning invaluable lessons about facing adversity with courage and grace. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one right now." The car ride back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both women lost in their own thoughts about the day's revelations and conversations. Catherine watched London pass by through tinted windows, thinking about all the people in the city who were fighting their own battles with illness, many without the advantages of private medical care and family support that she enjoyed. That evening, as Catherine sat down to dinner with William and the children, she felt the familiar gratitude for these moments of ordinary family life. The chemotherapy fatigue was beginning to set in, but she pushed through it to help Charlotte with her homework and listen to Louis's elaborate story about his day at nursery school. Later, after the children were in bed, Catherine and William sat in their private sitting room, discussing the day's medical update and Catherine's plans for returning to public duties. William's initial resistance to her appearing in public during treatment had softened somewhat, replaced by recognition that his wife's sense of purpose was as important to her recovery as any medical intervention. "I want to be honest about the experience," Catherine told him as they reviewed the proposed schedule for her first public appearance. "Not dramatically so, but I don't want to pretend that treatment is easy or that I haven't been affected by it." "The old guard will say that's too much information," William warned, echoing concerns that had been raised by several senior courtiers. "Then, the old guard needs to recognize that the monarchy's relevance depends on its ability to connect with people's real experiences," Catherine replied with quiet conviction. "I can serve the crown while also serving as an example of how ordinary people can face extraordinary challenges." As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself thinking about the woman from Yorkshire who had written to her, and the hundreds of other cancer patients who had reached out to share their stories. Tomorrow would bring another day of recovery, another step forward in a journey that was far from over. But tonight, surrounded by family and supported by those who loved her, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace about the path she had chosen to walk publicly through her treatment. The decision to be open about her cancer hadn't been easy, and it required constant navigation of the balance between personal privacy and public service. But, as she prepared for bed, Catherine was convinced that her honesty was helping not just herself but also countless others who were facing similar battles with less support and fewer resources. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror showed the physical toll of chemotherapy, but it also revealed something else: a woman who had discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, and who was learning to use her platform in ways that transcended traditional royal duties. The crown she would one day wear was being shaped not just by tradition and protocol, but by the very human experience of facing mortality with courage and grace. The May sunshine streamed through the windows of Catherine's private office at Kensington Palace, illuminating the stack of thank you letters she was personally signing in response to the thousands of messages received during her treatment. 6 months had passed since her final chemotherapy session, and, while her doctors remained cautiously optimistic about her prognosis, Catherine had begun to embrace what felt like a genuine new chapter in her life. Princess Anne stood near the window, reviewing the schedule for Catherine's upcoming engagements with the practiced efficiency that had made her the most hard-working member of the royal family for decades. The relationship between the two women had deepened profoundly during Catherine's treatment, evolving from polite family connection to genuine friendship built on shared understanding of duty, sacrifice, and resilience. "The response to your speech at the Cancer Research Center has been remarkable," Anne reported, referring to Catherine's appearance the previous week at the facility in Cambridge. "The donations to the research fund have increased by 300%, and Dr. Mitchell says they've received dozens of inquiries from potential research volunteers." Catherine smiled as she finished signing another letter, this one from a teenage girl whose mother was undergoing treatment for ovarian cancer. The personal connections forged through her public journey had become one of the unexpected gifts of an otherwise difficult period. "It feels good to be useful again," she said. "I love William and the children dearly, but I was going stir-crazy being treated like a delicate flower." "You were never delicate," Anne observed with characteristic directness. "But you've become something else during this experience. More grounded, perhaps. More aware of your own power to influence and inspire." The transformation Anne described was evident in many aspects of Catherine's life. Her approach to royal duties had become more focused and purposeful, her public speaking more personal and authentic. The polite distance that had characterized her earlier years as a royal had been replaced by a warmth and accessibility that seemed to draw people toward her rather than simply commanding their respect. A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and William entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression that had become more common as Catherine's health improved and his anxiety decreased. The strain of the past months had affected him deeply, but it had also strengthened his appreciation for their partnership and his understanding of Catherine's remarkable inner strength. "The children are asking if they can visit the treatment center with you next month," he reported, settling into a chair near Catherine's desk. "Charlotte specifically wants to meet some of the young patients she's heard you talking about." Catherine considered this carefully. Throughout her treatment, she had been scrupulous about protecting her children from the more difficult aspects of her experience while still being honest about her illness. The idea of including them in her advocacy work felt like a natural evolution, but it also required careful consideration of their emotional readiness. "What do you think?" she asked William. "I think they've learned more about compassion and resilience in the past year than most children learn in a lifetime," he replied. "And I think seeing their mother use her experience to help others would be a powerful lesson about turning adversity into purpose." And nodded approvingly. "The royal family has always taught duty through example. This would simply be a different kind of duty, more personal, perhaps, but no less important." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine's private secretary, carrying a folder marked confidential that contained the preliminary results of her latest medical tests. Catherine had learned to read the expressions of her medical team with the expertise of any long-term patient, and she could see good news in the efficient movements and relaxed posture of the staff who cared for her. "Dr. Patterson called this morning," the secretary reported. "All clear on the latest scans. She'd like to schedule a follow-up in 3 months rather than 6 weeks, which she says indicates excellent progress." The relief that flooded through Catherine was profound, even though she had been expecting good news. Each clean scan felt like a small victory, a step further away from the frightening uncertainty that had dominated her life for the better part of a year. But, more than personal relief, she felt a renewed sense of responsibility to use her platform wisely. "I want to start planning the foundation," Catherine said suddenly, an idea that had been percolating in her mind for weeks finally crystallizing into decision. Something focused on supporting cancer patients and their families, with particular attention to the psychological and emotional aspects of treatment that often get overlooked. Anne and William exchanged glances, recognizing the determination in Catherine's voice that signaled a major commitment was being made. Throughout her royal career, Catherine had been careful about her patronages and charitable commitments, choosing projects that aligned with her interests and expertise. This felt different, more personal and more urgent. "What did you have in mind?" Anne asked. "Practical support for families dealing with cancer diagnosis," Catherine explained, her voice gaining energy as she spoke. "Counseling services, support groups, help with childcare during treatment, advocacy for better workplace policies for cancer patients and their caregivers. The medical aspects of cancer treatment have improved dramatically, but the human aspects often get ignored." "You're talking about creating something entirely new," William observed. "Not just supporting existing charities, but building an organization from scratch." "Yes," Catherine confirmed without hesitation. "I want to use everything I've learned from this experience to create something that will outlast my involvement, something that will continue helping families long after I'm gone." The afternoon progressed with detailed discussions about the logistics and scope of Catherine's proposed foundation, and shared insights from her decades of charitable work, while William provided perspective on the constitutional implications of such a high-profile initiative. But underlying their practical conversations was a shared recognition that Catherine's cancer journey had fundamentally changed her approach to public service. Later that evening, as Catherine tucked her children into bed, she found herself reflecting on how much their family dynamic had shifted during her treatment. The children had become more protective of her, more aware of her mortality, but also more appreciative of everyday moments together. Charlotte had taken to leaving small drawings under Catherine's bedroom door, cheerful pictures of flowers and sunshine that had sustained Catherine through difficult treatment days. "Mummy," George said as she kissed him goodnight, "are you going to help other sick people like the doctors helped you?" "I'm going to try," Catherine replied. "Do you think that's a good idea?" "Yes," he said solemnly. "Because you know how scared they feel, and you can tell them it's going to be okay." The simplicity of his observation struck Catherine as profoundly true. Her credibility as an advocate for cancer patients didn't come from her royal title or her public platform, but from the authenticity of her experience. She had felt the terror of diagnosis, endured the indignity of treatment, and navigated the complex emotions of recovery. That knowledge was her most valuable asset in helping others. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Catherine's team began the preliminary work of establishing her foundation. Meetings with lawyers, discussions with potential board members, and conversations with medical professionals who could provide guidance on the most pressing needs in cancer care. The energy and purpose that had sustained Catherine through treatment now focused on creating something meaningful from her experience. Princess Anne watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and admiration. She had seen many members of the royal family struggle to find their unique contribution to public service, often settling for ceremonial roles that felt hollow compared to their potential impact. Catherine's willingness to use her personal pain as the foundation for public service represented a new model of royal engagement, more vulnerable perhaps, but ultimately more powerful. As spring turned towards summer, Catherine's foundation began to take concrete shape. The initial focus would be on providing comprehensive support services for newly diagnosed cancer patients and their families, filling gaps that Catherine had identified during her own treatment. But the long-term vision was more ambitious, advocating for policy changes that would improve the entire cancer care experience, from diagnosis through survivorship. The first fundraising gala was scheduled for the autumn, and Catherine had insisted on personally reaching out to potential supporters rather than relying solely on formal invitation protocols. She wanted people to understand that this wasn't just another royal charity but a deeply personal mission born from lived experience. "I keep thinking about all the women who don't have the advantages I had during treatment," Catherine told Anne as they reviewed guest lists for the gala. Private medical care, flexible work arrangements, unlimited family support. "If I can use my privilege to improve the experience for everyone else, then maybe something good will have come from this whole ordeal." "It's already come from it," Anne replied firmly. "You've shown an entire generation what it means to face adversity with grace and purpose. The foundation is just the formal expression of what you've already accomplished." As summer deepened and Catherine's health continued to improve, she found herself approaching her royal duties with renewed energy and clearer focus. The traditional elements of her role, state dinners, ceremonial appearances, overseas tours, remained important, but they now existed within a broader framework of meaningful engagement with issues that mattered deeply to her. The cancer experience had stripped away many of the superficial concerns that had once occupied her attention, leaving behind a clarity of purpose that surprised even her. She no longer worried as much about perfect appearances or flawless protocol, focusing instead on authentic connections and genuine impact. On a warm July evening, as Catherine and her family enjoyed dinner in the garden at Kensington Palace, she reflected on how profoundly her life had changed in the span of a single year. The woman who had received her cancer diagnosis in this same garden 10 months earlier felt like a different person, younger somehow, despite everything she had endured. "What are you thinking about?" William asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "Just how grateful I am," Catherine replied, watching their children play on the lawn where she had once sat consumed with fear about their future. "Grateful to be here, grateful for the support I received, grateful for the opportunity to use this experience to help others." "No regrets about the loss of privacy? The public scrutiny of your medical journey?" Catherine considered the question seriously. The decision to be open about her cancer had indeed meant sacrificing much of her personal privacy, with every aspect of her treatment and recovery subjected to public analysis and speculation. But it had also created connections and opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. "None," she said finally. "The privacy was never really mine to begin with. At least this way, the attention serves a purpose beyond mere curiosity." As the evening light faded and the family prepared to go inside, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace about the path that lay ahead. The cancer would always be part of her story, requiring ongoing monitoring and attention. But it was no longer the defining element of her identity. Instead, it had become the foundation for a new kind of service, more personal and more meaningful than anything she had imagined possible before her diagnosis. The crown she would one day inherit had been fundamentally transformed by her experience, shaped not just by tradition and ceremony but by the very human journey of facing mortality and choosing hope. In her vulnerability, she had discovered strength. In her honesty about fear, she had found courage. And, in her willingness to share her struggle, she had created a new model of royal leadership that promised to inspire and comfort others for generations to come.